So now that we already moved from the initial intrusion through the local administrator, through reconnaissance and dumping hashes, let's look at Kerberos and how Kerberos can help us move laterally. So the way Kerberos works is there are basically two type of tickets that you can get. The first ticket is TGT, or ticket granting ticket, and you request this for authentication by providing your credentials. Then it replies with a ticket granting ticket, allows you to request access to services using a ticket granted service. So a client will request credentials from a specific ticket granted service and will authenticate it with his own password and send it to an application server that has a supported Kerberos service in it. So again, we're asking for a ticket granted ticket. You can look at it as your entrance to an amusement park. And then each one of the rides will be your ticket granted service, where you need a specific ticket for them as well. So how golden ticket works? Well, if you have access to the Curb TGT account, you can use the Curb TGT password hash to create a golden ticket, which means it allows you a ride on each and every um, of the amusement park rides. The way to do that is you have your domain, you have your domain seed, and then you have a user ID that you want to impersonate. And that user ID, if it's being encrypted with the Curb TGT account, this is the key for the kingdom. This allows you to log in to every service, any service. And the way of using it is Mimikatz allow you to execute golden ticket. You will basically encrypt the user ID TGT with the Curb TGT hash. Then you will provide a KDC service, that specific encrypted ticket, proving that you are basically authenticated by other DC, and then you will be granted access to any resource within the domain. Other values you gain is because the valid time frame is part of a ticket, you can modify it from 10 hours to 10 years or whatever. And you can also run it from any unmanaged device, so you don't even have to run it from a domain member. So that's how it looks like. Basically, since you forged the TGT, you skip the first step of asking for a TGT. You use your golden ticket to ask for services, and then you're getting the relevant TGS, and you access the server, application server, for as long as you need and for any service. So in order to mitigate it, the main idea behind mitigating the golden ticket is to make sure you don't get access to the Curb TGT password. So to do that, you obviously want to reduce the attack surface on your domain controller, make sure that as little people can access it, as well as keep on maintaining the Curb TGT password, um, changing it regularly. And if you are infected with golden ticket, you actually need to reset Curb TGT twice in order to make sure your disinfection. Another interesting concept of Active Directory is the service principal name, or SPN. This is a unique identifier of service instance. And SPNs can be used by the Kerberos authentication to associate a service instance with a service login account. So for example, this allow a client application to request that the service authenticated an account even if the client does not have an account name. So if you get that Kerberos attack, most service account passwords are the same length as the domain password, and most service accounts don't have passwords to set expired. Most service accounts are not designed as per principle of least privileges. If you get access to those service accounts, for example, a MySQL account, you would be able to use Kerberos later on to get all the information. Get the TGSs and decrypt the service account hashes. So now that you have it decrypted, you can move into the server ticket ingredient. So the silver ticket ingredient is you target service account, you target service account password hash, and potentially you look for a local host service that is usually used for CIFS for persistence. So we used Kerberos, we got some service account hashes, and now we can implement the silver ticket. The silver ticket is identify the target server's FQDN, identify the Kerberos service running on the target server, and then just create this forged TGS, the silver ticket using Mimikatz again. Use the computer account password hash to maintain persistent, and you're golden. I actually use silver. So that's how the silver ticket looks like. We actually don't communicate with the domain controller at all for the silver ticket attack. The only thing you need to do is to look for the services and use this silver ticket directly accessing the application server. In order to mitigate the Kerberos and the silver ticket, you want to ensure that you have strong password lengths and complexity for service accounts. You want to make sure that you limit service accounts to minimal required privileges. So if someone's getting a hold of that service account, you limit the impact. And you want to enable AES Kerberos encryption rather than RC4 where possible because it is stronger encryption. Next one is a seed history. So the idea behind seed history is it has been used for object if the object was moved from another domain. So a new seed is created and that new seed becomes the object seed, and the previous seed is added to the S history property. So it's a feature that allows you migrate users from one domain to another. Exploiting that feature is with an attack called seed history injection. So what you do with seed history injection is you find an admin seed or equivalent seed and you insert it into seed history to enable impersonalization. Impersonation of an administrator, you can elevate access to local resources and or access to other inaccessible domains using that specific user. In this example is Mavar Hami with a new seed that has more privileges. So the way to protect or mitigate this attack is by cleaning up the seed history attributes after legitimate account migration is complete, and consider applying a seed filtering to interforest trust. Ensures that the seeds of security principles are from trusted domains. The next interesting attribute that can be added to accounts is replicating directory changes. The idea behind this attribute is to support sync between domain controllers. So you have multiple domain controllers to ensure high availability. And when you have this, you're trying to communicate between them. The accounts that used for that needs to be able to replicate information, including hashes from Active Directory. So it's enabled to read Active Directory domain services object, discover Active Directory domain services objects, and changes within the domain. Well, the way to exploit that is using a DC sync attack. So once we're discovering a domain controllers and request replication, user replication is required to use this the changes. DC returns replication data to the requester, including password hashes. So the classic use of the DC sync is as a precursor to a golden ticket attack, as it can be now used to retrieve the curved DGT hash. So the way it works is, again, the attacker mimics the DC, MSDRSR. It discovers DC and mimic replication. And then it requests user replication, requests replications of credentials via get and CC changes. And the DC provides password hashes to the attacker. So this is how it looks like. I'm going to start play it. Again, Mimikatz has the model for you to do that. I'm looking in here on all the groups, and I'm going to try to access a DC. You can see that the access is denied. And now I will get into Mimikatz. The first thing I need to do is I'm going to run DC sync, and the parameters I'm going to get in are the domain name and the user that I want to gain access to. This one is CurbTGT. I just got the information that I need, and from there I can build my attack using golden ticket. And again, the only credentials or the only things I need to have here is the ability to replicate directory changes. So in order to mitigate the DC sync, obviously we want to control accounts that allow replicate changes. And we want to implement some principles that will reduce the risk of propagating within our network, like network segmentation, list privileges, and 3 tiers admin, which I'll get into soon. So why do we have all of those flows and attack flows? We spoke about NTLM. There's also NTLM relay and other ways that can be leveraged. Well, the main issue is that credentials are exposed in memory, and the protocol itself is broken and it's still in use, specifically NTLM v1, but also NTLM v2. You cannot patch this design flow because that's what SSP is expecting. It just expects the NTLM hash. That's why that's the only parameters to validate your identity. And there's no mutual authentication. And so that's where men in the middle get into place, and attacks like NTLM relay. The password encryption for NTLM is not strong enough, and you cannot backport the patches for LSAS, the credentials guard, to Windows 7 or earlier. And it is enabled on all systems by default. Kerberos is more secure protocol than NTLM, but it still has some flaws. Kerberos principals can use NTLM hashes as long-term secret keys. So again, we're talking about a relatively easy to crack hashes using RC4. The Kerb TGT is the master key for all Kerberos tickets, the golden ticket attack. So again, we have the key for the kingdom saved within your domain controllers. So if you get a hold of it, it's game over. TGT tickets are portable. Once you get this golden ticket or any other forged TGT ticket, you can move it from one machine to another. And privileged attribute certificate is not always inspected by the DC. So you can also forge the pack, the actual permissions that you get. There's ways to query Active Directory for any users about the existing services. Score bursting, you request the GS ticket for cracking, and then there's no fallback port for Microsoft patches, similarly to NTLM. So to summarize, there are 5 points that I want to enforce. Given all those things, is obviously we cannot count on credentials to be our only line of defense or the only control to secure our assets. Credentials is just a one factor that needs to be combined with some others. And as an evidence to it, we can see that 47% of breaches are access related. We see that phishing to gain login credentials, access to emails, credential stuffing, stolen from third party or brute forcing, social engineering by phone, by mail. This is all leveraging the first line of defense in order to get into your domain. So it's not a matter of when, but how you will be compromised with your credentials. So given that, NIST came up with few guidelines around password, and now they're looking at creating longer passwords that are easier to remember and hard to guess, rather than short passwords that can be cracked pretty fast. So basically, the new guideline recommends to use a link or a chain of pass phrases instead. And we're talking about 64 characters. The second thing is principle of least privileges. There are still too many users within any environment we look at that have much more privileges than they really need for their daily work. And so the way to look at this from a system perspective is the principle of least privileges demonstrated by the privilege rings for the Intel 86. And from an access perspective, you need to look at the methods for each one of the accesses and segmenting the permission depending on a role. So starting with identities, put them into specific roles and add the permissions accordingly. The third thing is Active Directory Administrative Tier Model. That's a tier model that prevent an attack to propagate fast within your organization. If using this model, there are 3 tiers. Tier 0 is the managing of identity stores in a small number of systems. Tier 1 manage the enterprise servers, services, and application. And Tier 2 manage the enterprise desktop, laptops, printers, all the rest. And the way it works is you want to have the admin workstation separated from the admin servers, separated from the domain servers. So if one of the endpoint is compromised, the hackers won't be able to move between the tiers. Attack surface reduction. So now we're talking about how we block or how we eliminate those lateral movements. The idea behind the attack surface reduction is to move from aggregate attack surface, where there's a list of logs gathered along the way and eventually being analyzed, to a network controls that block attack tools and techniques, and in a system authentication authorizations methods to reduce process and data resource exposure. So on the left-hand side, you can see how the system can be owned before you really get a grasp of where the risk is. Where on the other one, you have controls that helps you to block each and every step of the compromising of the human attack surface, the network attack surface, and eventually the system attack surface. So one very easy and recommended way is use multi-factor authentication. Why won't you just go back into basics? Multi-factor, for sure, any external exposed portals, whether it's your VPN, your Outlook, web access, or your Citrix portal. All of those should be MFA. There shouldn't be any access to any resource outside the organization without MFA. But also inside the organization, if there is a suspicious movement, suspicious activity, specifically when it comes to sensitive assets, those should be protected by MFA. The other concept is adaptive enforcement. So depending on the level of risk is not binary, it's not 0 or 1. Depending on the level of risk, you might want to act differently. For low risk, you can engage users. You can send email notification telling Joe that his credentials were used to access specific server, and Joe can report back if it was not him. Maybe for more sensitive servers, you can extend a multi-factor authentication to make push a request to their mobile to verify their identity. And maybe for a very, very suspicious behavior that doesn't meet your history bias behavior or your peer group's behavior, you can simply block it, the access. And for those, you need to have sensors that necessarily, not necessarily based on log files, but rather are inline, that can enforce inline. So just to summarize, takeaway slide. Again, credentials are not a single control to protect your data. Active Directory administrative tier models will help you protect your data. The principle of least privileges for systems and permissions. And MFA, definitely any external portals as well as sensitive assets. And finally, use step-up authentications and adaptive enforcement. Thanks for your time and have